What's up, fam? Welcome to another pre-earnings review. Today we're doing CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is a leading cybersecurity firm. They're just short of $1 billion in quarterly revenue, growing by about 30% year over year. So probably one of the best growth firms out there from in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been a space that's gathered a lot of interest and a lot of attention, especially with the advent of generative AI and AI in general. Cybersecurity has also been very expensive over the number of years. I had put a video earlier about the cybersecurity landscape, so feel free to check that out as a precursor to this video. This video is focused on CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike releases earnings after market close, and there are some clues that we can draw in coming up with their high end and their low end estimate. So that's what I've done in this video. Let's go into the following sections to check out CrowdStrike's financials, CrowdStrike's patterns in their stock price, what my analysis says of the high end and the low end estimate, and then what we should do at the end of the day. All right, I'll see you guys in the next section. Okay, so let's look at their chart for a second first. So last quarter when they released earnings, it was a really good strong earnings report. I think they grew revenue about 33%. Sorry, ARR by about 33%, and the stock climbed in after close that day. Shortly after that, they were also added to the S&P 500, or those things probably happened concurrently. And that stock's been trading around the highs, or around probably the all-time highs. Yes, around the all-time highs, um, around the 400, sort of 380 to 400 clip. Um, After that, there was in about mid-July, so it was around this time frame, that there was that incident report that came out, and essentially, and I'll go into what exactly happened. But because of that incident, that took down Windows computers, and that affected a lot of customers worldwide, mainly the airlines industry, the stock cratered. So it took a little bit of a pause here around a 300 mark. Then there was more bad news, and the stock just continued to crater. And then there was other things that happened within the kind of the macroeconomic landscape and the overall tech industry. That finally took the stock to a bottom of $200. It formed a base over there, and then from that point had shown some good recovery up to this point, and has again taken a pause just before earnings. So looks like at this point the stock's just looking for some sort of consolidation, um, and just know investors are probably unsure where the stock's going to go fairly. And I'm in that boat as well, and I'm sure most of you guys are as well. So hopefully this will sort of take us in one direction or the other. This is the actual incident that happened. So CrowdStrike, um, blah blah blah. They talk about when the company was founded, and CrowdStrike's Falcon is essentially, so CrowdStrike's predominantly in the cloud security, endpoint security space. Other than unlike Palo Alto Networks, which kind of covers firewall, and a whole lot of other sectors, or not, a whole lot of other segments in the cybersecurity space. So CrowdStrike is basically concentrated in one of them, and CrowdStrike essentially competes with Palo Alto Networks, Sentinel One, but partners with Zscaler. Zscaler is about to release earnings, I think, next week or probably later this week. Anyway, back to this particular incident. So um, there was it's essentially a software bug, code bug. So a rapid response content update. So CrowdStrike was deploying a content update. It was delivered to certain Windows hosts, and sensor expected 20 input fields while the update provided 21 input fields. In this instance, the mismatch resulted in an out of bounds memory error, causing a system to crash. So it wasn't a cybersecurity, anything to do with cybersecurity per se, but it did impact customers, and the biggest impact that there was to Delta, which was claiming that their loss was about 500 something $million on a revenue basis. Now that could potentially break CrowdStrike, but since then there's been There's been chatter about CrowdStrike and Microsoft then coming to the same page and then resolving these things. So that's a bit on the actual incident per se. Let's go into the financials for CrowdStrike real quick though. So CrowdStrike is a in terms of revenue we covered, it's just short of $1 billion on a quarterly basis, growing around 30% ARR and revenue. They're a solid, if you go into the statistics, a profitable gross margin company. So 75% in gross margins. Net margins, so they've recently gone profitable on a net margin basis. So gap net margin basis, and last quarter they clocked around 4.65%. And I think it's probably something like 42 million dollars. So it's not hugely profitable. And long story short, revenue growth is going to matter more than profitability for this earnings, for sure. Although if they go unprofitable, that would be a very bad thing also. So that's a little bit that about the income statement. On the debt, they really have very little debt. Even at that equity, um, the current equity, they're still only at 30% of equity. They're very strong on a liquidity and from a solvency, from a liquidity level as well. They're around 1.71. So strong on from an income statement and a balance sheet perspective. Let's dive into the my estimates in the next section. Okay, so in terms of the way I've derived these estimates, I've got a high end and a low end estimate, and then therefore an average estimate. My high end basically is around how much has Palo Alto Networks seeped into CrowdStrike's growth, and that's really the key question to answer. Now, because of this incident, there could be customers that wanted to move to Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks has already released a platformization strategy. That platformization strategy is working. Whether it's working in numbers or not, or whether it's actually fully on steroids right now or not, is yet to be seen. Palo Alto Network strategy. Or there could be another check on another competitor, and Sentinel One also released earnings yesterday. So those are the two things that I've analyzed on. The low end of the estimate is some hypothesis in that this definitely would affect Palo Alto Networks in a negative way, and this might, some customers who are looking to sign up or were in negotiations, they might not have signed up with CrowdStrike, and they might be waiting on the sidelines with their existing cybersecurity vendor. So those are the two sort of polar opposite scenarios that I've analyzed. Now, in the high end of the estimate, here's sort of my analysis. So what I saw was Palo Alto Networks. Okay, the blue is Palo Alto Networks, the red is CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike is light red in the lastmost bar because it's an estimate. Uh, CrowdStrike has their ARR has been consistently sort of around Palo Alto Networks, is very comparable right up until about 2 quarters ago. Last quarter, so not this was the last quarter that was released I think last week for Palo Alto Networks, but the one before that, Palo Alto Networks then surely took over in terms of ARR growth. They clocked a 47% year over year growth. And then the last earnings, which was last week, Palo Alto Networks reported 43% year over year at $4.2 billion. Now, that's a great number. Don't get me wrong, but Palo Alto Networks has always been high in terms of ARR, at least over the last maybe 4 or 5 quarters than CrowdStrike. Does that tell me that they've taken business away from CrowdStrike? I don't quite think so. Their year over year has really been at the same clip as the last quarter. So 47% year over year and 43% year over year. I would have if they had really taken share away, I would have seen this number around 60% or probably even higher, because that would have indicated a whole lot of net new ARR coming in. And because ARR is an annualized number, it's a really good gauge of things like new customers coming in and churn. occurring. So existing customers leaving would be churn, new customers coming in would be net new ARR. So this is what my sort of high end estimate assumes, that CrowdStrike, and therefore CrowdStrike would essentially, based on my projections, would land somewhere around a 4 billion mark as well, 3.9 to 4, like let's just call it 3.9 billion, like the slide reports, in ARR. Okay, that's my high end estimate. My other gauge is Sentinel One has also reported earnings that were close to their estimate and outlook. So I really don't have any gauge to say that these competitors have taken anything away from CrowdStrike. In terms of the low end estimate, I assume some churn. I assume that the churn's probably gone to not Palo Alto Networks, maybe not Sentinel One, maybe has gone to Microsoft, maybe has gone to Google. Google, it was in the news to acquire this company called Wiz. Maybe has gone to them. Maybe has gone to somebody else. Um, or customers have paused renewals. Anything could have happened. So I've assumed a low case of a flat ARR number versus last quarter, which would be very, very bad for Palo Alto for CrowdStrike. So if CrowdStrike reports 3.69, that would be a really bad story, and the stock would probably crater from here. At the high end, the stock's probably going to rise around 10%. So this is my high end, this is my low end in terms of revenue. So their outlook was $960 million. My high end says $988 million. My low end says $917 million, and my midpoint says 952. So my midpoint is actually lower than my outlook. In terms of earnings per share, doesn't really matter as much, but I see them around between the squarely at 0.16 on an average basis, and between 0.18 and 0.14 in terms of their EPS. So let's wrap it up in the next section with what we should do with CrowdStrike. Other than the fact that there's a high end estimate and a low end estimate, I think one of the things that we definitely have to consider is this cost of the actual outage. Now, it's impossible to understand what percentage of revenue does Delta make up of the whole CrowdStrike of the whole CrowdStrike revenue number. So if Delta were to leave, what would that actually impact? How would that actually impact CrowdStrike? That it's impossible to find out. That data is not available. But what is available are these reports. We know the outage to cost the carrier $550 million, and it does say that this report does say that at the end, CNBC reported that Delta hired a law firm, and then they would seek compensation from Microsoft and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has not said a thing, or has not come out to say that they are going to make good to customers and so on and so forth. Because this was, I think, partly because this was not a CrowdStrike only incident in my mind. This was also because of Microsoft, and could be because of the way Microsoft's operating system is a lot more complex and heavy operating system than maybe iOS. And by the way, this didn't affect any iOS customers. The bug was definitely on the CrowdStrike side, but um, I don't know how much they are going to assume responsibility of it. I do know that one of the key questions is going to be, since this is not resolved, how much provision are you going to make to customers? Now, if CrowdStrike come up with something that say that we've either made a reserve for X, or we're still working with Microsoft in this incident, I view that as being a good story. Um, having pull in one having your partner pulled in to assume responsibility and liability for an incident like that is probably a better outcome for CrowdStrike than CrowdStrike being on the hook for it all, obviously. But I think that's, to me, is going to be the biggest risk in this particular earnings call. So, in summary, folks, from a financial standpoint and from a growth standpoint, I am somewhere between the outlook and the high end of the estimate on CrowdStrike. So, I'm bullish on from the financial front because I have no real data to say that the share and the business has been taken away from CrowdStrike. From a risk standpoint, I see that particular question being asked by one of the analysts, or maybe more, on what is this incident going to cost CrowdStrike. The way they answer that question is probably going to be one of the second biggest things that will drive the stock upwards or downwards. To me, if the management come out and say, hey, we're negotiating with Microsoft on this particular um, liability to customers, Delta, and maybe others, or maybe only Delta, hopefully, then it still is a little bit of a better outcome than them saying, no, it's not. We don't know what's going to happen, and them being sort of very very sort of non-transparent about it. I don't know which way they're going to go, but to me, the way they answer that question is going to be one of the second most important things on the call. Maybe someone's going to ask them about how much provision they've made for this particular incident that's already baked into their outlook. Now, if they are able to produce an outlook, and which is their full year outlook, which more than takes into account for some sort of a penalty payment, that might also be a good thing. Um, Lastly, I think having knowledge of the actual payment, and if it's a lot lower than what people are assuming, is also going to be a good thing. So to me, that whole incident and how that incident is resolved, or that legal incident now is resolved, is a or legal event is resolved, is probably one of the biggest risk for CrowdStrike. I don't see their financials being a risk. I'm overall bullish about CrowdStrike, and so that's what I recommend. Happy trading, and that's it on CrowdStrike. If you like this content, guys, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe. I'll see you guys in following videos. Take care.